So now, shifting gears from thinking about luxury, let's think about China Inc. and Luxury Inc. So during the Mao period with the Cultural Revolution, every effect was made, or every attempt was made to bleed out luxury, culture, and create a kind of a very homogeneous notion of comrades and members of the party and everyone equal. So, 1 billion people had to wear Mao suits, notwithstanding the rich history that China has of adornment, and you probably know about the Silk Road and China's previous appetite for luxurious things. Today, of course, the Chinese are extraordinary consumers of luxury goods, and one wonders that in light of the fact that Chinese were made to, act in a relatively conformist fashion, if the same, what neuro marketers call the mirror neuron effect is perhaps more pronounced in China than elsewhere. That now it's the luxury, bandwagon that Chinese are sort of trying to get in sync with. The fourth bullet is interesting because it speaks to certain deep-rooted cultural norms associated with China, that seeking status goods appeals to the mianji, or prestige face of the Chinese, rather than the lian, or moral face, and that there's something that enhances the reputation of Chinese individuals by consumption of luxury Western goods. Now, this idea of a prestige face might seem like something inane or trivial to us, but I can give you a personal anecdotal example of just how significant it is. Next week, I'm involved with a charity benefit in New York where, amongst other things, we're honoring a Chinese individual for his work with green technology. And so much of the back and forth between his team and the people on the gala committee has entailed making sure that this Chinese individual is going to be treated the same as the Western, prize recipients who are Johnson & Johnson and Christy Turlington. They want to make sure that he's sitting in the same kind of proximity to the Secretary General of the United Nations as they'll be, that his award will be the same size or perhaps even bigger than the award that Johnson & Johnson is getting, because otherwise there'll be some sort of losing face that would accrue. So this is a pretty interesting cultural nuance. So the idea of face and status and success is something that I would venture to postulate is more significant in the Chinese culture than perhaps in the American culture and others. So being part of the global world, and more specifically being Western, and the embrace of things Western for the Chinese is a matter of status and showing that you've arrived. There's also a biggest and best phenomenon which is supported by the state apparatus. Recall the Olympics and how it was all about showing the rest of the world that Chinese can be bigger, better, and so on. And it's interesting that in 3 of the 4 so-called BRIC countries, Brazil, Russia, China, and India, 3 of these 4 had imperial pasts where you had some sort of metaphoric connection to luxury, to extravagance, and so forth. And I think that might, I haven't done any sort of deep work on the subject, but I think just intuitively this might be a way for distinguishing those 3 from Brazil, which I would argue, and I go to all these countries, especially China, India, and Brazil frequently, that the Brazilian relationship to luxury is quite different from the Chinese and potentially Indian. It's also interesting that in the Chinese context, Chinese individuals develop brand awareness at home, but also are big spenders on luxury overseas. because there are huge tariffs on luxury goods in China. And then there's also the very commonplace notion that buying say an Hermes scarf in Paris invests it with greater sentimental value than buying it in the Hermes store in Shanghai. In the context of China, it's also important to not think of China as a single monolithic market. There are the three main cities of Beijing, Shanghai, and Guangzhou, but there are also second-tier cities that are trying to emulate the first-tier ones. There's also this difference between the central government and provinces. In March last year, there was a little funny incident where the Ministry of Tourism and Commerce in this province called Zhejiang rejected imported goods from Hermes, Dolce & Gabbana, and Versace over concerns for quality. And this kind of posturing is not uncommon. So, for instance, there was, in the context of this event next week, an advanced team was sent to check out luxury suites in hotels in New York. So presidential suites in hotels are pretty much interchangeable, but they had to sort of kick the tires and decide which ones are good enough. And then part of finding the good enough suite also was that it should have the number 8 on the door, which is another little interesting cultural nuance. But the idea of being able to show that we've got higher standards, or that we can reject the sort of epitome of Western luxury, is also an interesting ploy. The Chinese desire for global cosmopolitanism is also balanced by a strong pride in the traditional and what it means to be Chinese. And so the Chinese are sort of navigating or straddling, on one hand, belonging to a global economy and a Western consumer culture, but at the same time trying to assert nationalism and a particular identity. So going back to the initial vase example or metaphor, it's interesting that if you were to look at these two vases and the fact that there's a cloud of uncertainty over the authenticity of the one on the left, but it was still bid up to $18 million, clearly the one on the right, to even an untrained eye, has a more elegant shape, it's more intricate in the way the porcelain is carved, there's finer detail, it just looks better. But they were both linked by this common seal, this sort of branding device. Whether or not the emperor's the seal in the case of the first vase was true, is a matter of speculation. But there, again, on this matter of national pride, the fact that these were for auction in a Western public domain made it important for the Chinese to bid the price up. So part of sending vase 1 from 800 to 18 million is to show the rest of the world that we can afford it, and that our artifacts and things with a Chinese provenance are worth something significant. So I already mentioned that China is this huge country, and we all know the major centers, but who's heard, for instance, of Suzhou, which is a city with a population bigger than New York. So there are these huge pockets of population with people who are earning boatloads of money, and where real estate costs the same as apartments in major U.S. cities.